what's up you guys, the Curious Owl here, and please excuse for the multitude of weird things going on in this video. First of all, the backdrop is gone, it fell. Also, my hair is up in a very strange small bun with some hair out here. It is freaking hot right now in Michigan. In our apartment, honestly, it's really hot. We only have one good fan that's in the bedroom, and we're gonna be getting at least another one I think soon because it's sweltering. So please excuse me if I take a second at any point to fan myself because it is freaking hot in this office. But today I wanted to talk to you guys about my June wrap up. So June was the month for the Biblio games. I think I did fairly well considering what happened this month. I did complete all of my challenges for the Biblio games, so that was a win. So out of the 12 books I had tried reading this month, I ended up completing 7, and the total number of pages I read this month was 1,765, and I listened to 1,698 minutes, or about 28 hours and 18 minutes worth of audiobooks. Out of the books that I completed, 2 of them were physical, 3 were ebooks, 2 were audiobooks. 2 of them were from my personal collection, 3 were ARCs or were sent to me, and the other 2 were borrowed. So to start off with the month, the first thing that I finished was my audiobook for Feel Good 101 by Emma Blackery. This was to complete a challenge for the Biblio games, which was the Mission Strategy Challenge for Team Sidekick, which is to read a nonfiction work. This is an audiobook that I've read now for the 3rd time. If you haven't checked out my original review of Feel Good 101, I will leave a link in the description for you. It is by far one of my most favorite audiobooks and one of my most favorite essay-driven books I think that I have read. The second book that I completed was another audiobook, and this was for A Man Called Ube by Frederick Bachman. This audiobook was really great. I really enjoyed it a lot. I ended up giving the book a 4 out of 5 stars, and it wasn't because of anything specific that I didn't like. For some reason, though, I was not really as wrapped in the story as I think I wanted to be for this audiobook, and I think that's because I might have been a little distracted with the fact that the beginning of this month I was starting a new job. The story follows a man called Ube who is, I would say, probably in his late 50s, early 60s. He's essentially trying to commit suicide after losing his wife to cancer, and then immediately afterwards losing his job and being forced into early retirement. Ube is kind of just done with life, and he tries to kill himself several times throughout the novel, so trigger warnings for suicide, obviously. But throughout those times, he meets different kinds of people, and they all kind of give him reasons in a way, I would say, to staying alive. And it's a really sweet story, and I think it really talks about the idea of community, and it really talks about, the fact that there are reasons to live when you are contemplating suicide. And while that may seem very difficult for a lot of people, there are things that they can look for that might help them to move away from the idea of suicide. And sometimes all it takes is someone kind of distracting you from the worries and the sadness that you're feeling. The third book that I ended up reading and finishing was The Dancing Girls by M.M. Chonard. This is a book where it talks about a really difficult case because the killer is almost unidentifiable, because the women that are killed within the story are expressly stated as never being people who would go off with strangers or would have any kind of extramarital affairs of any kind. And unfortunately, that is brought to light because the fact that these women are both found to have been married and have been possibly killed by the same person who may have been a lover of theirs. And it's unclear as to who this person is, how they're getting these women lured into these situations, things like that. It's a really compelling and interesting story, and actually reminds me a lot about the one that I've been working on for the last almost 4.5 years, maybe 5 years at this point. And it's just very hard to understand, who the criminal is, but obviously in the story you do find out who the criminal is because half of the story is split into his perspective and why he's doing the things he's doing, how he's going about finding these women, and it's very interesting and compelling to watch this character, lure these women, but it's also really disgusting and honestly makes me a little bit more afraid of being in the internet realm because he does some things on the internet that seem innocent, but are really not, and it kind of terrifies me. I gave this book a 4 out of 5 stars, and the thing that really kind of made me not give it a 5-star was because I felt like I didn't quite understand the main cop. If you guys watch my Biblio Games vlogs, I talked about this at length. I felt like she was very one-dimensional. There were some things that were brought up that seemed interesting, but they were never fully fleshed out. And I understand that this is the first novel in a series, but I really wish that there would have been more added to some of the things that were discussed about this main character, Joanne's kind of state of mind, because there's a whole aspect of this story where she's unable to commit to a romantic relationship because apparently she had lost at least one boyfriend or fiance to some kind of violence, and that plays a huge role in how she's unable to really put herself fully into a relationship, despite the fact that she also is a cop. And I just never really got a good, satisfying, story with that. I never really got to know Joanne as well as I wanted to, and maybe it would be expressed later in the series, but I wish that it would have been kind of brought up more in the first book, because it seems like it would have made the most sense. The first book I ended up DNFing after that was called Deskin Amber by Robert Jacoby. This was supposed to be a dark contemporary that focused on a individual who, after losing a few co-workers in some kind of violent episode, one co-worker basically killed the other in some kind of fit of rage. Basically, the story is him, the main character, and several other people going on this trip to the funeral of the individual who was killed. And there's so many things that are brought up apparently that might have to do with drugs or something like that. I really couldn't get through the first 20 pages of it without falling asleep because, for one, the style was very kind of blah. It didn't really do anything for me, and on top of that, there were so many points within just the first chapter that the main character would talk about something that had nothing to do with what he was originally talking about with the actual story, and it just made the whole thing really clunky and really just not interesting at all to me. The next book though that I read and finished was Homecoming for the Cowboy by Nicole Helm. This is a adult male-female romance novel, and it was okay. It was, enjoyable for the time I read it. I got through the whole thing. It was kind of cute at times, but in all honesty, it was not really as steamy as I wanted it to be. It honestly felt a lot more like a YA romance than an adult romance. The next book I read and completed was the first volume of the Paper Girls graphic novel by Brian K. Vaughan and Cliff Chang. I thought this was okay for a first installment of a graphic novel series. I think it was a little too short for my liking, but I understand graphic novels can't be, super long, especially, at the beginning of a series. But this is a kind of almost like Stranger Things kind of graphic novel. Like, if you like Stranger Things, I think you would really like this because it plays on a lot of the same ideas. There is basically these 4 girls who are all in their early teens, and they are paper girls. They are basically, instead of having, paper boys that go around and deliver the morning newspaper, these 4 girls do it. And this is placed in like the early 80s, which is very similar also to Stranger Things, which is another reason why I think people that like that show might like this. And unfortunately for them, at one point, they find these very strange individuals that they think might be aliens that are stealing something, and they go into this warehouse and find this very weird contraption in the basement. And when they get out of the warehouse, they find that they are on a completely different planet or universe or something, and they're basically trying to figure out what the heck's happened. And that's pretty much the entirety of the first installment. It was really good. I really like the characters that are involved with the story. I like the different ideas that are going on with the story because one of the characters may have some unique abilities that will be explored later. But for some reason, I felt like I didn't get a satisfying ending with this, even for a first installment, and I wanted more from it. I wanted more on these girls. I wanted more on what might be going on, things like that. And I think it just kind of led to me kind of being like, it was okay. It was pretty good. I would definitely like to read more of the series, but it was not nearly as good as I think Saga was, but I really loved Saga, so that's going to be hard to beat. The next book that I tried reading but ended up DNFing was The Brooding Duke of Danforth by Christine Merrill. This is another male-female adult romance story, but this is placed in like the 17th or 18th century, and that alone just did not jive with me. I could not get really past much of the first few chapters because I don't care for romances that are set in the 17th and 18th century. I don't like it when authors try to write in that style because it is not organic, it's not authentic. It's like you're really trying too hard to be Jane Austen, basically, is the idea, and I couldn't do it. I couldn't read it and not cringe. was just really not good. The next book that I read and completed was The Starter Wife by Nina Lauren. This is basically a adult mystery thriller dealing with a woman who thinks that she is being reached out to by her husband's former wife, who had disappeared over 8 years prior and was presumed dead, but she thinks that she is being contacted by this woman and as her life is being threatened. So the story is her basically trying to find out what happened to this wife and if her husband may have had something to do with it. And oh my god, the story took me for a ride. I loved it. It was so good. It honestly blindsided me. Like, there was this idea at the very beginning of the story that there is a stalker involved with this story that is obsessed with the husband. You think that the story would focus a lot on that, and it does, but it does not go the way that I had anticipated, and I don't think anyone else who reads it would have anticipated it to go the way that it did. But holy crap, by the end of this novel, I was so shook, like I was afraid to go to sleep. The next book that I tried reading and ended up DNFing was The 13th Guardian by K.M. Lewis. This I thought was supposed to be kind of a more high fantasy story, but it was actually kind of more of like an urban fantasy. It was supposed to be about this story of like how the world is basically ending. There's this big apocalypse that's happening and all of these people are dying. There are natural disasters occurring left and right. And there's one person that the story is supposed to follow, keyword supposed to, that is supposedly a person who is able to survive all of this, and they're known as what's called a guardian, and they're supposed to protect the entire earth with like 4 or 5 other people. I say supposed to because that was not what the story was leading me to believe with the way that it was written. The story had basically like 7 different perspectives all within the first like 50 pages of the different things that were happening in the world, which was cool and all, you know, considering that I'd like to know how different parts of the world are, you know, falling apart because of the apocalypse. But I didn't even get to meet the actual supposed main character of the story until over a quarter of the way through the book. I don't understand why you could focus so much on the rest of the world and not even once within the beginning of any of that bring in the main character that's supposed to be the main character. Like, it was absolutely ridiculous. So I ended up like just DNFing it because I was getting so irate with the whole thing that I couldn't stand reading another page. The next book I completed and loved was Not Your Sidekick by C.B. Lee. This was the group book for the Sidekick challenges. I just realized I haven't even been talking about what any of these books completed challenges for, but I'll get to that in a second. A young adult novel focusing on a girl who is the daughter of these really kind of big, in this town, superheroes. Like, they're not big in the grand scheme of things, but they're pretty big within this town that she lives in. And unfortunately for her, she is the only person in her family that does not seem to be gaining any kind of powers. And it's quite uncommon considering that, you know, most superhero families have, you know, children that have superpowers. Her older sister has powers. Her younger brother doesn't, but is incredibly intelligent and uses his intellect as if it's a superpower. The main character, Jess, has nothing. She's nothing going for her at all, and she's at the point where if she doesn't get any powers by her 17th birthday, which is coming up very soon, she's basically not going to have anything, really. So in order to try to combat that and try to at least have something good on her college applications, she decides to take up an internship at this big tech company in town, which she finds out later is actually the corporation that her parents' biggest enemy runs. And she also has to work with her crush, who is another girl. Also, the main character is Asian, which was really interesting, and the story is basically placed in the future. There were so many great things about this book, not even just the story itself. It was the little intricacies of the world that made it so great, because it was very clear that in this world there's a bigger push for use of pronouns and also for acceptance of people regardless of race, sexual orientation, things of that nature. There is a trans character within the story that they make it very clear wants to use he pronouns, and literally one of the first questions anyone will ask each other in this world is, what are your pronouns? So it was so amazing to see something that actually was like so forward thinking, but also like it felt very organic. Like, it didn't feel forced. It felt like something that naturally would have kind of happened. And then the story itself was just so good. It was great to read. It was honestly quite short, and I loved it. I'm so excited to read the next part of the series if I can, which I think is Not Your Villain. Oh, just the whole story from beginning to end was just fantastic. If you guys get a chance to read Not Your Sidekick, please do, because it's great. Okay, so now that I've gotten that one out of the way, the other 2 books I read this month were DNFs, but I'm gonna go back through real quick and let you guys know what these other books I read were for challenges. So A Man Called Ube completed my challenge for the Biblio games, that was to read a book with a satisfying ending. Paper Girls completed 2 challenges, which was to read a book that is in a format I don't typically read, which is graphic novels, and also to read a graphic novel. And then Not Your Sidekick also completed 2 challenges where I had to read the group book, and then also it counted for the challenge of a book with a funny side character, because there was this little character in Not Your Sidekick that was this little robot, and he was so cute, and like he would always try to be like good and do things well, but he was so broken that he was kind of making a fool of himself. Like it was adorable. Okay, back to the last 2 books that I read this month. So one of the last books I read this month that I DNF'd was called Time After Time by Lisa Grunwald. This was supposed to be very similar to something like The Time Traveler's Wife or The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, which were both stories I neither read nor watched the movies of, so I think I was very just out of my element with this story. But it was supposed to be about this couple where the female of this story, named Nora, is essentially dead, but somehow she's stuck in the 1930s. Nobody knows why, nobody understands what's happened. And then she meets this guy, I can't remember his name, but they kind of fall in love, and he has to try to figure out how to deal with the fact that she's supposedly dead and somehow is still hanging around Grand Central Station in New York. It was really cute, I think, from a romantic standpoint, but when I got to the point of understanding what happened to Nora, I kind of lost interest, and I just fell out of enjoying it. I just didn't really feel a draw back to it. And the last book that I was so sorely disappointed by that I ended up DNFing was The Outside by Ada Hoffman. If you watched my last Biblio Games vlog, I was working on this to the bitter end of the month. Like, I sat yesterday trying so hard to finish it, but at 60% of the way through the book, I DNF'd it because the majority of the story was leading up to this really great idea that I was totally for. And then after a certain point, things just got so confusing. I was just very, very lost, and I was just so disappointed. This is an adult sci-fi focusing on a world where there is this belief that these robotic individuals, AI almost, they're considered the angels and the gods. They're the ones that are actually like living beings that are, you know, the caretakers of the world, and they kind of run everything. The main character, Yasira, who is an autistic woman that is in a relationship with another girl that is expressed very early in the story, she is pretty much one of the most intelligent people within this world, because as a kid she always was interested in things like physics, and then when she went to college she studied under this amazing professor named Dr. Talir, who basically taught her everything she knows, but kind of also had some autism like things going on with her, so they also gelled really well because of that. And after she graduates from college and they start working together on this big project that is supposedly going to help run this big ship that is going to go off of the planet, Dr. Talir disappears and leaves Yasira, the main character, to do the entire thing by themselves. Nobody knows where Dr. Talir goes, nobody knows what happened or why she left. It's just kind of been left to the idea that she's just gone and might be possibly dead. But when the item that these two had created called the Sheen Talir reactor basically goes haywire, the gods start to think that Dr. Talir might have something to do with it. So basically, Yasira is pulled into this mission to find Dr. Talir and understand why she's doing things the way she's doing and what kind of forces she has behind her, because some of them are very dark and mysterious and nobody knows about, and they don't know how to control it. So she's basically pulled into this to try to figure out how to stop it all from happening. It was such a great concept of a story at the beginning. I loved it. It was honestly, the first like 50% of it was wonderful because it wasn't making me feel stupid with the fact that it's a sci-fi novel and I don't have a lot of experience with sci-fi. It was interesting, it had a great character, it had some really great dynamics going on between the main character and the guy that's basically kind of like her go-between with the angels and everything else. It just, once we met the mentor at the point in the story where we met her, things from there just kind of just took a nosedive because everything became so much more confusing and everything became so much more like, just, I don't even know, like it just confusing, I think is the word I would go for it, because I didn't know what the crap was going on. within the next 10% after we met the mentor, and I was so disappointed because I really wanted this one to be good. I really wanted it to be something I would really love, and I just was so not okay. Was not okay with it at all. But there you guys go. Those are all of the books I ended up reading at some point in some way within the month of June. If you guys did enjoy this video, please do give it a big thumbs up. Let me know down in the comments below if you read any of these books and what your thoughts were on them, or what you read during the month of June, if you did the Biblio games and how you did. If you haven't already and you'd like to be, hit the button down below and subscribe to become an owlet in our flock, and I will see all of you guys in my next video. Bye guys.